Welcome to week 3 of our NPTEL course on International Financial Management. In week 1 and week 2, we built our foundations. We understood the global financial environment, the history and evolution of exchange rate systems, and the institutional framework within which international finance operates. That was our groundwork. Now, starting this week, we move into the heart of the subject. Now we'll begin to ask the question that really matters in international finance. Questions that business, investors, policymakers, and central bank grapple with every single day. And the most fundamental of these questions is what determines exchange rates? The answer, which we will explore in depth today, is that exchange rates are not arbitrary. They are not just the result of speculation or market sentiments. They are connected very deeply to something far more fundamental, that is, the prices of goods and services in different economies. And the theory that captures this connection is what we are going to study today. This is known as Purchasing Power Parity theory or PPP theory. Now, before I formally define PPP, I want to start with a very simple intuitive idea, and the idea is purchasing power. What is a purchasing power? It is simply the ability of a unit of currency to buy goods and services. How much can your money actually purchase? Let me give you a simple example. If rupees 100 allows you to buy a full meal at a local restaurant in India, then that meal is a reflection of the purchasing power of rupees 100 in the Indian economy. Rupees 100 gives you that much consumption. This is your purchasing power. Now, purchasing power simply refers to a unit of currency to buy goods and services. In other words, it tells us how much consumption a particular amount of money can support. Now, here is where it is getting interesting. Purchasing power is not the same across countries. The same amount of money, or more precisely, its equivalent value when converted at the market exchange rate, can buy different quantities of goods in different economies. Imagine you take that rupees 100, which at a rough exchange rate might be $1.20, and you go to a restaurant in New York. What does $1.20 get you in New York? Perhaps a small cup of coffee. Certainly not a full meal. Now, does this mean the rupee is weak in a negative sense than the dollar? Not exactly. A lower exchange value of the rupee compared to the dollar does not automatically mean the rupee is weak in the negative sense. What it tells us is that price levels differ across countries. The cost of living, the cost of production, wages, infrastructure, all of these factors make goods cheaper in some countries and more expensive in others. Merely having a lower exchange value, meaning that $1 exchanges for many rupees, does not mean the rupee is inherently weak. A currency is considered weak in a negative sense only when it loses value because of high inflation, economic instability, low investors' confidence, or large deficits. Instead, the difference mainly reflects difference in prices and purchasing power across countries. And this is exactly where purchasing power parity becomes relevant. These differences in purchasing power form the basis of purchasing power parity. Now, PPP tries to establish a relationship between currencies based on what they can actually buy. Instead of viewing exchange rates as determined only by financial markets, purchasing power parity explains them in terms of real economic factors such as price level, inflation, and the cost of goods and services across countries. Let us now understand what purchasing power parity formally means. Purchasing power parity is a theory that attempts to equate the purchasing power of two distinct currencies. It establishes the exchange rate based on comparative purchasing power of currency A and currency B. Now, the core equation is E is equal to PA upon PB, where E is the exchange rate, PA is the price level in country A, and PB is the price level in country B. The core idea is this: if currency A and currency B are to be fairly valued relative to each other, then the exchange rate between them should reflect the ratio of their price levels. Formally, E is equal to PA upon PB, where E is the exchange rate, PA is the price level in the country A, and PB is the price level in country B. In other words, the exchange rate should be such that a unit of currency A buys exactly as much in country A as the equivalent amount of currency B buys in country B. Prices, when expressed in common currency, should be equal. This is the essence of PPP, and to understand why this should be true, we need to go to the foundation of the theory, a principle called the law of one price. The law of one price states that domestic price of goods should equal its foreign price when expressed in common currency. For example, let us say in India, a particular good cost rupees 100, while in USA, the same good cost $5. Now, what is going to be the exchange rate? The exchange rate is going to be $5 equal to 100 rupees, which will give us $1 equal to rupees 20. When market prices deviate from equilibrium, arbitrage opportunities arise. I'll explain you with help of an example. Let us say that initial exchange rate is $1 is equal to 20 rupees, right? But in the market, now there is the change in prices of the commodities, and now price of X commodity in India is rupees 125, and the same commodity in USA is $5. Now what will happen? The arbitrageurs will start functioning. They will buy commodity X from USA at this initial exchange rate that we were having, and that is going to be, and the total cost is going to be 5 into 20, which is going to be 100 rupees. Now they will sell this in India, and they are going to fetch how much? And fetch rupees 125 from this sale. In this way, they will make a profit of 125 minus 100, which is 25 rupees. And this will continue. This will continue till the equilibrium is reached. Equilibrium is reached and $1 now becomes equal to 25 rupees. That is, $5 will now be equal to 125 rupees. So this, after this, there is going to be no arbitrage profit, and hence the price of the commodities in both the countries is going to equate. An arbitrator is a sharp, rational market participant whose entire business model is to spot and exploit exactly these kinds of price differences. He will always pounce on this opportunity immediately. Thus, the exchange rate adjusts to equate price levels across countries, enforced by continuous activity of arbitrators, and the equilibrium is restored. In other words, the law states that if there are no transparent costs, trade barriers, or taxes, the same good should sell for the same price in different countries when prices are converted into a common currency. Now we can continue with an example. For example, if a laptop cost $1,000 in the US and the exchange rate is rupees 80 per dollar, the same laptop could cost around rupees 80,000 in India. If it is cheaper in one country, arbitrators would buy it there and sell it in the more expensive market, eventually pushing prices towards equality. Let us now understand the concept of absolute purchasing power parity. So, absolute purchasing power parity is the idea that the spot exchange rate between two currencies should be proportional to the ratio of price levels in the two countries. It assumes no trade barriers, no transportation cost, and perfectly competitive markets. It is applicable when identical goods are proportionally represented in each country's market basket. Now, absolute PPP is not just an idea, it is expressed as a formal relationship, and the formula is quite intuitive. The spot exchange rate S is represented by S is equal to price in foreign country divided by price in domestic country. When where S is the spot exchange rate between the two currencies, PF is the price level in foreign country and PD is the price level in domestic country. It is very important to note that only identical goods are used in the law of one price, because only then can price differences be attributed to exchange rates and not to differences in quality, brand features, or packaging. For example, if we compare the price of the same model of phone in India and the US, so any difference in price should mainly come from the exchange rate. But if we compare different models of phones, the price differences may also be due to different features or quality along with exchange rate. So, the law of one price assumes identical goods to make a fair comparison across countries. We now see how PPP is applied to real world. One of the real world application of PPP is the Big Mac Index. The Big Mac Index was created by the magazine The Economist, and it does something wonderfully simple. It compares the price of a McDonald's Big Mac burger across different countries and uses those prices to determine what the exchange rate should be under PPP. The rate that would make the burger cost the same everywhere. Why a Big Mac? Because it is a standardized product. The ingredients are largely the same: the patty, the bun, the special sauce, the lettuce, and cheese. The preparation process is the same. The restaurant ambience is broadly the same across the world. McDonald's has built an empire on consistency. But how does this work? The price of Big Mac are compared across countries. Then the exchange rate is determined. That would equalize the burger price in both countries. So if a Big Mac cost $5 in US and rupees 200 in India, the PPP implied exchange rate is rupees 40 per dollar. This brings up the burger price to a uniform international level. Similarly, the Starbucks Tall Latte Index applies the same logic to another globally standardized product, that is a Starbucks latte, which is consistently prepared across all its outlets worldwide in the same way. Now, if the PPP exchange rate is rupees 40 per dollar, but the actual market exchange rate is rupees 80 per dollar, it means that the rupee buys more goods domestically than the market exchange rate suggests. In other words, goods and services in India are relatively cheaper compared to the US. Therefore, the rupee appears undervalued relative to its purchasing power. Now, what do these indices actually tell us in practical terms? They serve as a practical tool for understanding currency valuation. They indicate whether a currency is undervalued or overvalued relative to its PPP implied fair value. If the index suggests a currency is undervalued, that is, goods are cheap in that country relative to what the exchange rate implies, that currency is typically expected to appreciate over time as markets correct. Conversely, if index suggests a currency is overvalued, then it means goods are expensive relative to the exchange rate. That currency is expected to depreciate in future. Now, these are not precise forecasting tools. However, rough and intuitive indicators of currency misalignment. They remain remarkably useful. Economists and financial journalists continue to refer to them because they make the abstract idea of purchasing power parity easier to understand and more tangible. At the same time, using only one product, such as Big Mac, to judge exchange rates is a very simplified approach. The price of a single item can be influenced by local taste, taxes, transportation cost, wages, and branding. A more reliable method is to compare the prices of a broad basket of goods and services across countries. The broader version of purchasing power parity does not focus on whether one product has the same price everywhere. Instead, it asks whether an entire basket of goods and services cost the same in different countries when prices are converted into a common currency. We use a basket of goods because no single product can represent the entire economy. The price of one item may be affected by local factors such as taxes, transportation costs, wages, branding, or consumer preferences. A basket of goods gives a broader and more reliable picture because it includes many different products and services that people commonly buy, such as food, clothing, housing, transport, and healthcare. One commonly used indicator for this purpose is Wholesale Price Index, or WPI, which covers a wide range of goods including primary articles, fuel and power products, and manufactured goods. By comparing the WPI of two countries, we can get a more comprehensive picture of relative price levels and thereby estimate a more representative PPP based exchange rate. But there is an even more refined version of purchasing power parity that does not compare absolute price levels at one point in time. Instead, it looks how price change over time in different countries. This is known as Relative Purchasing Power Parity or RPPP. The central idea behind RPPP is straightforward. If prices rise faster in one country than in another country, its currency should gradually lose value relative to the other country's currency. Relative PPP revolves around a simple but powerful idea. The percentage change in the exchange rate between two currencies should mirror the percentage change in the price indices of the two countries. In other words, if India's prices are rising faster than US prices, the rupee should be depreciating against the dollar at a rate roughly equal to the inflation differential between the two countries. For example, suppose inflation in India is 8%, while inflation in US is 3%. Indian goods are becoming more expensive more quickly than American goods. Over time, the rupee should depreciate by roughly 5% against the dollar to maintain purchasing power differences. This gives us the concept of the adjusted exchange rate, or what is also called the real exchange rate. The real exchange rate is the nominal exchange rate adjusted for the relative inflation rates of the two countries. The formula is adjusted exchange rate is equal to S naught into 1 plus HT divided by 1 plus HF, where S naught is the initial spot exchange rate, HT is the inflation rate of the home country, and HF is the inflation rate of the foreign country. Now, I will explain you relative purchasing power parity with help of a numerical example. Now, let us consider a scenario in which India's inflation rate per annum is 5% and that USA's inflation rate per annum is 3%. Now, we want to know that what is going to be the future exchange rate after 2 years. This is the question, fine. Now, what is given to us, the information given to us is that the current exchange rate is $1 equal to 80 rupees. Now, the adjusted exchange rate can be calculated as 80 into 1 plus 0.05 upon 1 plus 0.03 to the power 2. This 2 represents the number of years. So, the answer comes out to be 83.10 rupees per dollar. So, this is what? This is the domestic countries inflation, and this is foreign country inflation. Now, we have been building a rich picture of PPP, the law of one price, arbitrage, absolute and relative PPP, and the Big Mac index. But I want to be honest with you about something very important. PPP does not always hold true in practice. Empirical evidence frequently shows deviations from the ideal conditions that PPP postulates. And understanding why PPP deviates is just as important as understanding the theory itself. Let us go through the key reasons one by one. The first category is explicit and implicit trade restrictions. Explicit restrictions are the visible, tangible barriers, import duties, tariffs, and quota restrictions. If India imposes a 30% import duty on a product from the USA, the price of that product in India will be 30% higher than in USA. And this price difference will persist even if you account for the exchange rate. The duty creates a permanent gap between the prices in the two countries, causing a deviation from PPP. Next is implicit restrictions. They are less visible but equally important barriers. They include complex customs procedures, lengthy clearance process, bureaucratic requirements for transferring goods across borders. Now, even if there is no formal tariff, these obstacles increase the cost, time, and uncertainty of international trade, and they too create persistent price differences that prevent PPP from holding. The second major factor is interest rates, and this can sometimes dominate the effect of inflation. According to Purchasing Power Parity, a country with higher inflation than the US should normally see its currency depreciate over time because its goods are becoming relatively more expensive. However, this does not always happen. In 1990s, some countries had both high inflation and a very high interest rate. Those high interest rates attracted foreign investors who wanted better returns on their money. To invest in those countries, investors first had to buy the local currency. This increased the demand for the currency and pushed up its value. As a result, even though inflation was putting downward pressure on the currency, capital inflows were putting upward pressure on it. In some cases, the effect of strong capital inflows was powerful enough to prevent the currency from depreciation as much as PPP would predict. This shows that exchange rates are shaped by several forces at the same time. Relative prices and inflation matter, but so do interest rates and international capital inflows. Third is the transportation cost. Only when the price differences becomes larger than the cost of moving the goods will arbitrage become worthwhile. This means that the transportation cost creates a range or a band within which prices can differ across countries without anyone trying to profit from the differences. Because of this, the law of one price and purchasing power parity work better for goods that are cheap and easy to transport and less well for goods that are bulky, fragile, or expensive to ship. For example, suppose a product cost $500 in the US and this cost the equivalent amount in India. If we equate it to dollar, it becomes $540. That means it is $500 in US and the same product is $540 in India. If the shipping, insurance, handling cost is $50, then there is no profit from buying the goods in the US and selling it in India because the price differences is smaller than the transportation cost. Fourth, There is the issue of non traded goods in price indices. The price indices that we use to calculate PPP, that is the WPI and the CPI, wholesale price index and the consumer price index, include many goods and services that are not traded internationally. Now you think of a haircut or purchase of real estate. These goods cannot be shipped from a cheap country to an expensive one to arbitrage away price differences. Their prices are determined purely by domestic market conditions, and the arbitrage process does not exist here. Many items in countries' price index are non traded goods and services such as house rent, haircuts, restaurant meals, electricity, education, and healthcare. These cannot easily be bought in one country and sold in another. As a result, their prices are determined mainly by domestic factors such as wages, local taxes, regulations, and demand and supply conditions. If these prices rise or fall, the overall price index of the country changes. Such differences cannot be eliminated through arbitrage because these goods and services are not traded internationally. Since no arbitrage can take place, the resulting price differences make it appear as though the currency is deviating from purchasing power parity. And the fifth, there is the problem of lack of domestic substitutes. Normally, if the same product is cheaper in one country than another, traders can profit by buying it in the cheaper market and selling it in the more expensive one. The arbitrage process helps bring prices closer together. But when a country imports a product for which there is no domestic substitute, the arbitrage mechanism becomes limited. Even if foreign prices rises sharply, buyers in the importing country still have to purchase it because they cannot switch to local alternative. Since there is no substitute and demand remains strong, the higher foreign prices is simply passed on to the importing country. As a result, price differences can persist and the law of one price and purchasing power parity may not hold exactly. PPP is fundamentally concerned with the relationship between exchange rates and price levels across countries. To understand this more clearly, it is useful to distinguish between nominal and real exchange rates. The nominal exchange rate is simply the market exchange rate. For example, rupees 85 per dollar. It tells us how many units of one currency can be exchanged for another. But PPP is not really concerned only with its market rate. It is concerned with what that exchange rate means in terms of purchasing power. This brings us to the real exchange rate, which adjusts the nominal exchange rate for the differences in prices between countries. The nominal exchange rate is the rate you see in the newspaper, on your bank's website, or on the airport currency exchange port. It is a direct current rate at which one currency can be exchanged for another. If you go to a money changer today and are told that $1 is equal to 83, that 83 rupees is nominal exchange rate. It is straightforward and does not account for inflation or price levels in either country. The real exchange rate, on the other hand, is the price adjusted exchange rate. It tells you something deeper. It reflects the relative purchasing power of the two countries. It answers the question that once we adjust for inflation and price changes in both countries, has the currency actually gained or lost its purchasing power relative to the other currency? It provides a more accurate picture of exchange value when buying goods and services. It is calculated by adjusting nominal exchange rate with price levels that is the inflation rates of two countries. The formula is real exchange rate is equal to nominal exchange rate into domestic price level divided by foreign price levels. Let me explain to you with help of an example. Now let us say that we have two countries here, India and let us say USA, and we know about the price index of both the countries. Now here the base year, we are taking the base year as 2010, and let us say the price index is 100 in both countries. Now we take the current year. This current year is 2025 and the USA price index is 120 while the India price index is 180. Now how are we going to calculate the real and implied exchange rate? The real exchange rate as we know is equal to S naught into the price level of let us say WPI of domestic country upon WPI of foreign country. Now let us say that what is given to us is S naught, that is for 2010 is equal to $1 is equal to 55 rupees. Now we put in this equation and what do we get? 55 is our S naught into 180 the price index in India and 120 the price index in USA. This gives us 82.50. Now let us say that the actual nominal, that is you go to a money exchanger, the currency exchanger, and you ask for the rate and he gives you a nominal exchange rate which is published in newspapers and the bank's website, and the rate is $1 is equal to 90 rupees, which means that according to PPP the value of the dollar should have been 82.50 rupees, but the dollar is 90 rupees. Now it means that rupee depreciated more where? More in nominal exchange rate, that is more than than the what inflation differences alone justifies. That means rupee is undervalued relative to its purchasing power. Under relative purchasing power parity, differences in inflation rate between two countries should be reflected in the changes in the nominal exchange rate. In other words, if the domestic country has a higher inflation rate than foreign country, its currency should depreciate to offset the loss of purchasing power. The PPP implied depreciation can be calculated as exchange rate according to PPP is equal to 1 plus inflation rate of the domestic country divided by inflation rate of the foreign country minus 1. To assess whether the actual rate movement is sufficient to maintain competitiveness, we use real exchange rate indicators. That is equal to Q is equal to 1 plus inflation rate in the domestic country divided by 1 plus inflation rate in the foreign country multiplied by 1 plus exchange rate, where pi d is the domestic inflation, pi f is the foreign inflation, and E is the actual depreciation of the domestic currency. If Q is equal to 1, then PPP holds and the competitiveness of the domestic country remains unchanged because the exchange rate has adjusted exactly in the line with inflation differences. If Q is less than 1, the domestic currency has depreciated more than the required under PPP, making domestic goods cheaper and improving competitiveness. If Q is greater than 1, the domestic currency has depreciated less than the required, causing domestic goods to become relatively more expensive and reducing competitiveness. Now let me explain you with help of an example. Suppose the domestic inflation rate is 8% and foreign inflation rate is 3%. Then according to PPP, domestic currency should depreciate. And by how much amount? It is going to be represented by this EPP, where 1 plus inflation rate of domestic country, 1 plus inflation rate of foreign country minus 1. Now, if we put the values, it is 1.08 divided by 1.03 minus 1, which gives us 0.0485%. Now, if we multiply, if we take it in percentage form, so it is going to be 4.85%. Now, suppose the actual depreciation is only 2%. Now, let us calculate the value of Q. Now, here Q is equal to 1 plus pi d upon 1 plus pi f into 1 plus E. Now, here E is how much? E is 1.02, depreciation is 2%. So, if we put the values, it is going to be, which is going to be 1.0289. Now, if there is another way of calculating PPP, it can be done by seeing 1.0485 divided by 1.02, which gives us 1.0289. This means that this is what our EPP is, which is equal to EPP that we were expecting, and this is what we are actually having, that is the E. Now, how are we going to interpret this whole thing? Now, the way to interpret this whole thing is that the actual depreciation, if we see here, actual depreciation is less, and which is only 2%, and this is less than what PPP implied depreciation is, and how much is it is? 4.85%. Now, from the value of Q, we can say that the currency, domestic currency is overvalued. Now, when we say it is overvalued, what we actually are saying is that the competitiveness declines about 2.89% compared to PPP benchmark. Now, how did we get this 2.89%? This is the value of Q. Now, let us understand the individual impact of inflation on exchange rates. Imagine there is a sudden surge in inflation in the United States. What happens? US goods become more expensive. Foreign buyers start shifting their purchases away from US goods towards relatively cheaper British goods. This increased the demand of British goods, and it translates into increased demand for British pounds, because to buy British goods you need British pounds. At the same time, the demand for US goods and falls, and therefore the US dollar also falls. Upward pressure on the pound and downward pressure on the dollar. This result is that British pound appreciates and US dollar depreciates. Inflation in the US has weakened the dollar, exactly as PPP would predict. Now, this brings us to the close of today's lecture. We began with the simple idea of purchasing power, built up to the law of one price, and saw how arbitrage enforces exchange rate equilibrium. We then moved through absolute and relative PPP, understood the difference between nominal and real exchange rates, and recognized why PPP deviates in the real world due to trade barriers, interest rates, and transportation cost. In our next lecture, we will take this further and explore the international Fisher effect, which ties together what we have discussed today about inflation along with interest rates into one unified framework. Thank you, and I will see you in the next lecture.